I thought after a break you'll make some more noise. Make some more noise. Our next speaker uses paraprodokins and euphemisms that can leave native speakers pleasantly discombobulated. A perspicacious scholar and erudite statesman who can school any snollygoster on why being rodomontade and quo modo conquis is deplorable. Wait for it, guys. If you didn't understand the last two sentences, and if you are beginning to get hippopotomonstrosis quipideliphobia, then I suggest that you take your exit on the left, because ironically, when it comes to English, this man is always right. Dialing it down. Dialing it down one bit for normal people like you and me to understand, he's India's answer to Ren and Martin, author of almost about 30 books, former Under Secretary General, former Union Minister for Education and External Affairs, a member of Parliament, and most importantly, the Chairperson of the Advisory Board at I.I.M.U.N, to talk to us about a Wonderland of Words and his life, a man I am very, very grateful to be able to call guide, mentor, and friend. In flesh and blood, for over a decade now, he has supported the organization, and this is the first time that all of you get a chance to see him in person. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please rise and join me as I welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
I have no idea what he was telling you about me behind my back, or rather in front of my back, because the acoustics there weren't great. But anyway, I've been following the cricket all morning, ever since landing. All this pressing stuff.
And do you think we stand a chance?
Not in Perth, I don't think. Not especially as expected, we had a disastrous start. So we'll have to, sorry, I meant to turn this, I thought I had turned the sound off on this, but anyway, there we go.
And the Indian batsmen are also hoping that they turn off the pace and bounce on the wickets in Perth.
There we are.
But thank you for doing this, firstly. Really,
it's a pleasure to see you. In fact, when you first suggested this date, I was a bit nervous that Parliament might be in session, but the government doesn't like Parliament too much, so they've delayed it till next Monday, which suits me fine. That's why I'm here. Great to see you all.
Dr. Tharoor, if I may start with, and this is the only time that you'll see me with a lot of, because this is one man who you need not just a lot of paper, but a lot of books before you start a conversation. As my grandfather kept saying, that a conversation with a knowledgeable man is better than reading 100 books. But Rishabh, read 100 books before you have that conversation, because otherwise there's going to be no point in the conversation.
Oh dear.
But Dr. Tharoor, in a world that is ruled by brevity, where most people think that lucidity is key, where okay has become okay, and now it has become K. Young people live by FOMO and YOLO. Our human ChatGPT, that is you, continue to champion the magic of literature and words in your book. For me, you are my Albus Dumbledore. And I quote him when he says, "Words are our most inexhaustible source of magic, Harry." You've expressed that in your book, where you write, words can move you to tears. In this context, explain Generation Alpha and Z. What role does Wonderland of Words play?
Well, Wonderland of Words is a book about words. That's what Rishabh was referring to. It's my last book so far. And it's really a collection of short essays to introduce readers to the joy of words and the various things you can do with them and how you can do them better and what's fun about them, because I've found words to be a lot of fun. In many ways, I think human civilization would have been impossible without language. It doesn't matter which language, but having language is what gives shapes to our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, our ideas, our experiences. Without language, without words, there is nothing. There is no thought, because a thought cannot be conveyed without words. There is no emotion, because feelings can only be expressed up to a certain point through our facial expressions, through a hug, through some show of anger. Beyond that, you need words to explain why your feelings are the way they are, to come to grips with your feelings and one day to overcome them. So you need words even for the things you think you don't need words for. And of course, all the great inventions required words. All the ideas need words to be able to evolve them, shape them, share them with others. So for all of you, imagine if you didn't know any words in any language and couldn't speak any words, how would you get anything done? And that's why, in many ways, the greatest achievement of human beings was the invention of language. And therefore, through language, the ability to communicate, the ability to invent, the ability to advance, the ability to go beyond what the previous generation had imagined. All of you will think of things we never thought of. Good for you. But you need words to be able to do so.
And to move on from one generation to another, you need words to be able to make an impact. And one line that has made a gargantuan impact on me is the one where you quoted Margaret Atwood, where you say, if there are no young readers and writers, there will shortly be no older ones. Literacy will be dead and democracy will be dead as well. What is the importance of reading and how, in your opinion, is it tied to democracy?
Well, reading, as I said, is part of this business of actually understanding ideas. Yes, you can listen to lectures, although that also involves somebody using words, but listening only gives you a certain level of comprehension. Reading gives you far more because you see the word in front of you. You can go back to it and grasp it better if you want to read it a second time. You can study it, challenge it. You can actually allow yourself to respond to it when you can see it in front of you. So reading is more than listening. Secondly, reading is far more complex than listening. And why is complex important? Only because the complexity of an idea is often what makes it worthwhile. It's not a simple black and white thing. The world is actually full of grays, full of different shades. To grasp something, you need to read it and understand it in full in its nuances. And that, again, is easier done through reading. One of the reasons people are so disparaging of WhatsApp history or WhatsApp anything, WhatsApp science, is that when people try and reduce complicated ideas to a short soundbite or a 1-minute video clip or just a clever little meme, it doesn't actually fully convey the essence of what went into the idea behind it and how you have to deal with it, grasp it, and then take it forward. So I think reading is the only thing that gives you all of this. It's also true, by the way, even for something like fiction. So for democracy, that was your question. Without understanding your rights in full, without understanding politicians' accountability in full, without understanding and having a way of advocating your point of view, your convictions, your beliefs, there is no democracy. Democracy is about you, right? It's about every individual citizen of our country having a say in determining his or her future. That's what democracy basically is. And that means you have to understand the issues before you can decide. If you're only voting because some elder told you how to vote, or you're only voting because somebody has the same caste or the same religion or speaks the same language as you, you're obviously doing your democracy a disservice. There may as well be no democracy because you're not voting on any other basis. So for democracy, reading is important. Reading is also important for other things, but we won't come to that as Rishabh is going on.
Now, what you mentioned, that reading is very important for democracy because only then can you have an informed opinion, and then it is only then that you should cast your vote. But reading also helps in enriching your vocabulary.
Yep.
Schools across the country are going to watch this in their classrooms, and you're a man who the left, right, and everybody else will agree that when it comes to English, you're the best school teacher for English. What got you to develop how did you develop such a vocabulary that regales anybody that you meet?
It all happened right here in Mumbai. I was a small kid here. I was born in London, but my parents moved here when I was 2.5 years old, and I promptly developed very bad asthma. And in those days, I'm afraid there were no inhalers, no bronchodilators, no nebulizers. You basically took a very strong medicine that made your heart go thud, thud, thud like a bass drum. And you couldn't sleep. You could barely struggle to breathe. So I was up a lot of the time, a little big-eyed kid sitting up in bed, unable to lie down because I couldn't breathe if I lay down, unable to go out and play with my friends. And in the Bombay in which I was growing up, there was no television. There was certainly no Nintendo or PlayStation. Laptop computers and mobile phones were not even a gleam in their inventors' eyes. So all I had were books. And if you couldn't sleep, what do? You didn't have these other distractions, you read. And so I read widely and I read indiscriminately. I was also the oldest child in the family, and therefore I didn't have elder brothers or sisters to borrow their books. And therefore I started reading my parents' books well before I was old enough to understand them. But I read, and my father had books all over the house. I read everything I could lay my hands on. And in the process, I actually acquired a heck of a lot of words, ideas, and a taste for reading. When I talk about words, I often tell people, oh, teach me a new word today. And I'll say, I'll teach you an old word instead. It's very simple, short, one syllable, 4 letters. Read. Because reading is the best way of acquiring words. When you actually come across the same word in 3 different books, in 3 different stories, or 3 different contexts, you'll understand the meaning, the usage, the nuance very quickly. And I never even needed to look up dictionaries because I was reading so much that if there was a word that was vaguely unfamiliar, I remembered in which context or sentence I'd read it. Then I read the word in another book in a different sort of sentence. I said, oh, so that is what it means. And it clicks in place. So the more you read, the more words you acquire. And then sometimes you can get, by reading, the joy of the music of the word. And it's odd to speak of music with words because you don't think of that. You think of music only of songs. But in fact, words have their own music. Words have their own sound in your head. Words have their own appearance on the page. One of the reasons that old-fashioned poetry always used to have rhyme and rhythm and meter was precisely because of the fun of seeing similar words that would rhyme with each other. So all of these things are part of the joy of reading. And I would urge you all, if there are any amongst you, and I'm afraid I do have some friends whose kids tell me that they only read school books. They read books in the classroom, they read books for their homework, and they never read a book outside those 2 activities. I tell them you're making a huge mistake. You're depriving yourself of a real source of pleasure. If any of you are like that, let me shame you right now. You must read for pleasure. Not just because your school wants you to, not just because your teacher told you to, and not just because you have an exam to pass. All that's also important. But because books can actually be fun. They open up your mind. They expose you to different things that you've never thought of. You live through somebody else's experiences that they're putting on the page, or somebody else's imagination that they're putting on the page. So read for pleasure. And don't even feel obliged to read what people tell you you ought to read. Read what you want to read. I must say, Rishabh, when I was a kid, I read really indiscriminately. Stories, adventure, mysteries, thrillers, everything. Whatever I could get. It didn't really matter what it was as long as I enjoyed it. And that's what gave me the pleasure of reading. That's what I want you all to discover. I remember a friend of mine telling me her son only cared about football. I said, there are books about football. Get him a book about football. Let him read. When we discover great old players of the past or records or whatever, and he'll realize that reading can also be fun, even in the worlds you think you already know.
The important thing is to read. Whatever you read does not matter as much as the fact that you must read. The books that come out these days have a very different English than the rhythm, rhyme, and meter that you spoke about. They use Indian English. Now, there's a very interesting chapter in your book, A Wonderland of Words, which I was reading, and I chanced upon certain parts of that where you end the chapter by saying, hello, and I will extrapolate that. Hello, myself, Rishabh, and yourself. Where you reply, myself gone. And it was a hilarious note to end the essay on. How do you perceive the usage of such phrases? Is this the correct way of using English? Because at the end of the day, everybody who's sitting in this room would have at some point said, ek miss call de dena yaar. or give me a missed call at least once. So,
Yeah, missed call is okay because the meaning is clear. I mean, I've said in English, there are three kinds, right? There's sort of the Queen's English, or now the King's English, and the British have a king now, which is the correct, proper English. There's Indian English, just as there's Australian English, American English, South African English, and these are all legitimate forms of English. But then there's bad English, and we're sometimes guilty of the third also. So I have no problem with some Indian English expressions, which are understood only by Indians, but which nonetheless are legitimate forms of the English language. You know that there are words in American that don't exist in English because the language evolved. The English language went to America in the 1600s onwards, and some of it got stuck in the usage of the 1600s in England, whereas in England it evolved. So, to give you an example, the season between summer and winter in England is called autumn. In America, it's called fall. But in 16th, 17th century England, it used to be called fall as well. That word fell out of usage there. It stayed in usage in America. So, no harm in saying fall if you're in America. So, American English and English are different, but they're not. You can't say one is bad and the other is good. But then in India, for example, we use some words which used to be there in English. We got them from the English, but the English no longer say them. The English don't say thrice, they say 3 times. We say thrice. It just got stuck here. But why is that bad English? It was correct English once upon a time. In India, it's still correct English. 1/8 of a mile is a furlong. In India, people will still say, you know, if you're going somewhere, it's 2 furlongs down the road. At least when I was growing up in Mumbai, it was a very common expression. Maybe we don't say it anymore because we much more got used to kilometers. I was a kid when we switched from miles to kilometers, so people still said this. But no one has been saying furlong in England for ages, we say. So some of that is fine. It's not bad English, it's simply Indian English. There are some words Indians have invented. Whether that's bad English or good English, you can debate. But it is legitimate English. For example, if you read our newspapers, so a chap who has been frequently arrested or has various criminal charges against him in India is called a history sheeter because he has a history sheet in the police station against him. That is not an English expression, not an American English expression. It's only an Indian English expression, a history sheeter. But what's wrong with that? They've taken 2 legitimate English words and combined them, and the meaning is very clear. I don't think that's wrong. It's just Indian. Okay. But then there are some usages we have which are either awkward or which are ungrammatical. I mean, you can ask, I mean, Rishabh has read my essay, so he knows, you know, how can you draw a distinction? Ultimately, the distinction is drawn by the acceptability of usage. I mean, when an Indian says, I'll miss you until you are gone, that is wrong English. Because what you mean is, I'll miss you until you come back. I miss you as long as you are gone is correct English. Right. But in India, very often people use until when they really mean as long as. So that is wrong English. Or people might say, is he your real brother? When you talk about your brother. Now, that makes no sense. Are you accusing him of having an imaginary sibling? Is he your real brother? No, because in India, we often call cousins as brothers. So we're asking, is he your real brother? Meaning, is he your real brother or your cousin brother? Now, that's a very Indian usage. But it can also come across to a foreigner as completely incomprehensible because in foreign countries, cousins are not called brothers. So if somebody says, so-and-so is my brother, there's only one kind of brother, it's a real brother. So for an Indian to say, is he your real brother? It's like you're asking him, are you imagining a brother? Is he real or is he unreal? You know, this sort of thing. So there are different expressions with different contexts. But read the essay, there are 100 more examples in the essay than this.
Talking about essays and talking about brothers, sisters, and different pronouns now that one uses to describe people. There is an entire essay that is dedicated to sexist language. In a generation where pronouns hold a much higher sentimental value, to what extent do you feel this is something that one must address, and where is it that one must draw the line when it comes to addressing people by the correct pronoun? As I'm told, Rishabh, it is he and not them, and you should not mix up the two. So,
Well, grammatically, it makes no sense to use they for a singular person. In the West, and particularly in America, this habit has started when you say they because you don't want to assume their gender. I think that's a bit ridiculous, but we've got to that point. What's happened is that the world has evolved to be extremely sensitive about people's feelings on various things. And as you know, we now have this whole debate going on in the Western world about whether people are genuinely biologically male or female from birth, or whether it's a role assigned to them by society and culture, and they should be entitled to choose. Now, in most traditional societies, indeed in most, I would say probably 95% of the human population, the debate is absurd. You know, it ought to be visible whether you're a boy or a girl. Now, you may be a boy who's oriented in a different way, but you're still a boy. You may be a girl who's oriented towards girls, but you're still a girl. That's a different matter. But the gender is not debatable, or so we all thought. My generation thought that. Today, a lot of young people have decided to change their gender, for example, a lot more than was ever common when I was young, or even when Rishabh was your age. Things are changing very, very fast, right?
You've described my grey hair, but thank you.
Yeah. So the fact is that this is why, instead of merely saying he or she, it's become almost politically correct in America to say they for people, because you are not then assuming their gender from either their appearance or their name. Now that may be polite, but it's also slightly absurd, and certainly in English it's ungrammatical. They always means plural. You can't refer to an individual and say they said this. No, she said this, or he said this. But if you're completely unsure of their gender, or you're unsure what gender they want to be called by, you say they. Now what's happened now is people at the end of their messages and their emails are writing the pronouns they want to be referred to by in many places in America, which I find ridiculous. So you get a letter saying, you know, dear Shashi, signed Rishabh Shah, brackets, he, him. Why should I be told that Rishabh Shah is he, him? Unfortunately, with a name like Shashi, because though it's a masculine noun in Sanskrit, there are some women going around calling themselves Shashi, so maybe writing she, her would not be a bad idea. But that's a different matter. But then there are some people who write their own name and then write brackets, they, them. And how can an individual be they, them? It's bad English.
It's bad English. So there we've settled the debate of how far this should go. You mentioned something in your book.
But you know, in the book, I'm going to much more basic issues. Like, for example, when I was young, a chairman had no gender. Chairman was the person chairing the meeting. It doesn't matter if it was a man or a woman. But today, you have to say chairperson, which I find a rather ugly word. But yeah, okay, fair enough. If a woman doesn't want to be known as a chairman, and she wants to be called a chairperson, she's entitled. Shall we show her that respect? But now we also got to this absurd extent where a female actor, who used to be an actress in my childhood, has to be now called an actor, which I find absurd. Because actor is very clearly a masculine noun, and actress is the female version thereof. But no, apparently, to call a female actor an actress is somehow demeaning. Now this is a kind of political correctness that to my mind strikes me as odd. But again, my attitude is, if a woman wants to be called an actor, I'll call her an actor. But she is, in my mind, she's an actress.
You know, very, very well said. An actor is different from an actress, and there's nothing wrong in an actress being called an actress.
That's my view.
Just also how gender roles are now getting defined and becoming discriminatory in a way, where a house... whereas a person who takes care of the home or a homemaker is not supposed to be the best discipline per se, but that one can choose. But I was raised by a homemaker, and I'm very proud about the fact that my mum actually chose to be a homemaker, and therefore...
but you know, when your mom was young and she chose to be what she was called a housewife. Homemaker is again a gender-neutral term, because a homemaker theoretically can be a man or a woman. So that's again, now that may be an improvement, because again, for example, when I was young, when I was in school, etc., you would use man when you meant human being. So there are famous poems where you'll find, the Parliament of Man, or Locksley Hall by Tennyson. What is the Parliament of Man? Women can't go? Actually, in those days, it's true. Women couldn't even vote for Parliament in England. But the truth is, Parliament of Man meant the Parliament of all mankind. Today, you will find it odd to read, for example, the famous line from the United Nations Charter, I beg your pardon, from the UNESCO Charter, UN's Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, says, as wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Beautiful idea that you have to influence human minds to prevent war and conflict. But why do they say men? You think women can't start wars? I mean, we've had Indira Gandhi winning a war in the subcontinent. We've had Golda Meir winning a war for Israel against the Arabs. So why can't women also be there? So the problem is, in those days, when you said the minds of men, you actually meant all human beings. That is probably, definitely, sexist language. And now instead of man, you should be saying mankind. Instead of men, you could be saying humankind. There are other ways you can talk about human beings, because you should not assume the dominance of one gender. And I would say to the boys here, those are things you can be sensitive to. It's the other ones that I was a little more awkward about.
Right, and there are new words, as you mentioned earlier, that everybody asks you saying that there is, teach us a new word, and the word that you refer to is always read.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much.
After reading
Thank you.
the
You
book,
sound like you need a chai as well.
the voice.
You got a bit of a voice, huh?
Yes,
But anyway,
yes,
would you
yes.
like to share this?
No, that's fine. I'll have something later. But one word that I came across in your book was Cockwomble. And what is the etymology of this word, and how did it come into existence, basically?
Sorry, which one? I was...
It's called Cockwomble.
Oh, Cockwomble. The etymology, I believe I've mentioned it in the book, and I can't swear to remember every detail of it, but a cockwomble is actually somebody who's a bit of a twit is another shorter offensive word for it. Somebody who isn't as great as he thinks he is, does rather dumb things and doesn't realize how dumb they are. It's a cockwomble. Now, so what's the origin of it? If I've mentioned it in the book, you can tell me, because you've read the book more recently than I have.
I don't think there is the mention of the origin, which is why I wanted to touch upon this.
That's why you wanted. Okay, we'll Google it together after the show, and I'll tell you.
No, but then, is it safe to assume that we are surrounded in the political landscape by a lot of cockwombles?
Very true.
And when it comes to cockwombles in the political landscape, if I may, who according to you tops the list?
That is extremely unwise for me to get into, because being a political person, you can well imagine. By the way, here's the answer from Google. There is no information available about the etymology of the word cockwomble. But there is a related word called cockalorum, which means self-important behavior, conceitedness, or variety. Apparently, it has come from some sort of profession since the days of the Franco-German War. But you can't find a particular origin as to where it comes from. You know, very often people sometimes make up words because it just sounds as if it can really be. Doesn't cockwomble sound really insulting and offensive? So somebody made it up at some point and just stuck. Lots of people try and make up words and they don't stick. In fact, the 18th century was full of people making up words that actually didn't stick. I've mentioned this in one of the essays in the book. Somebody who made up dozens of words, thought he was very clever, but no one got used to use those words except he himself, and they never stuck. Whereas Shakespeare made up hundreds of words, and most of them are still in use, and most expressions by Shakespeare are still in use. So sometimes you have a good ear for language and you convey it. But yeah, cockwomble is there are lots of people in our politics, and there's some in your state, but I better not be rude about any individuals, because that would be wrong in front of school children. You're entitled to make your own judgments about political leaders, but there are a few cockwombles about, yeah.
Now, in as many words, you've communicated your point as always. English as a language has evolved and looted words from all parts of the world, including the very word loot, like you've mentioned in your speech. And
by the way, I should have mentioned that some Canadian political opponent of their current Prime Minister did put out a meme not long ago using the word cockwomble. I think finally I found the definition, had a picture of his Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, on it. So, each country can use the word for its own politics. But sorry, let's go back. I beg your pardon.
So was that a reference to Justin Trudeau?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, English has looted words from all parts of the world.
Yeah.
Just like how you're a voice for the silent and voiceless in Parliament, so too you are for the silent letters like Hague and tongue, in the words Hague and tongue. Therefore, it would be interesting to know from you if English is just a farrago of words looted from different countries, which has had an unprincipled vocabulary masquerading as a language.
Oh, it's very wicked of you, Rishabh. He's taken a notorious tweet of mine and paraphrased it. But anyway, let me tell you that many languages borrow words from other languages. Hindi is full of words from various languages: Turkish, Persian, Arabic, and even English. So don't be surprised that languages borrow from other languages. But English does have an enormous amount of linguistic influences. They like to pretend it's all Latin and Greek, ancient Latin and ancient Greek. Not true. There are words derived principally from those two classical languages of Europe, but there are also words derived from various other sources. And as England spread around the world, they started borrowing words from the countries they were coming exposed to. And I've written many, many references to these kinds of words, but there's an entire chapter about words in English that have come from Indian languages. And very often the English don't even realize these words came from Indian languages. One of my comments in one of my books was that the British in India took the word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. They didn't have the word loot before. They came here, they looted us, but they also stole the word loot from Hindi. And it's there now in English, and most English people don't realize the word loot comes from some other foreign country, namely from India. Same with thug, which is actually tug in India. Same thing, but spelled T-H-U-G, and they made it thug in English. What will really surprise you maybe is shampoo. Shampoo came from the imperative form of the Hindi word champo, which means to press and knead. So this English person getting a domestic servant to wash their hair for them would say champo, and that became shampoo. So you see that there are lots and lots of very common, ordinary words. You can imagine words like jungle, bungalow, and so on, which are obviously Indian in origin, but there are words that are not so obvious that actually also came from here.
And we spoke about English as a language, but at the same point in time, this is a very interesting book that you've written, and this is one of my favorite books. Mm-hmm. It's called The Battle of Belonging. And I find it to be a very interesting read. There you talk about, whilst English, if not the politicians, in my humble opinion, at least the language claims the concept of liberal constitutionalism. Mm-hmm. In your case, isn't sometimes praising the Prime Minister getting you reprimanded by the Congress party? And therefore many say that there is an oversimplification of ideas and thoughts which germinate in the West, and therefore some say that English is the better English. Is that the case? And the second part of the question, many say, when in India do as Bharat prescribes. Do you think this is one of the reasons why your party is losing the battle of narratives, and why the exit polls in Maharashtra also show the same?
Oh, I don't talk to them about exit polls. Have they ever been right in the last 10 years? It's quite amazing that that media even gives them space, especially after the last election when they all predicted a thumping majority for the BJP, going from 367 to over 400. And the BJP actually lost its majority. After that, I don't know why anyone trusts any exit polls. But look, some of the ideas about democracy, liberalism, and so on are not coming from anywhere else but from our own constitution. Our constitution is a liberal constitution. It's a constitution that gives everyone equal rights, irrespective of your language, your caste, your religion. That doesn't determine your rights in this country, and it shouldn't. You have the same rights as everybody else, whatever your language, whatever your caste, whatever your religion. And that's what's very important for all of you to understand, that the Constitution is what embodies the idea of India. When people say that the idea of India is debatable, then you have to ask them, are you challenging the Constitution? When the Constitution says that every Indian is equal, who are you to say that some Indians are more equal than others because of the religion into which they happen to be born? we have, as I pointed out in the book that Rishabh mentioned, The Battle of Belonging, we have many different notions of nationalism around the world, many of which are nationalisms that are called ethno-nationalist, ethno-religious nationalism or ethno-linguistic nationalism. So even 50 years ago, every German was white, Christian, and spoke German. Today, that's no longer the case because the world is evolving. In India, it was never like that, right? You couldn't say that somebody who was Indian had to be brown and a Hindu and speak Hindi. We had lots of people who were none of these things and who were actually Indian citizens with the same rights as those who were brown and spoke Hindi. So the point we have to understand is ours is a civic nationalism. It rests on constitution, on a constitution and on institutions, on democratic rights and privileges. And that's what I believe we are here to defend. So I don't agree with Rishabh saying that, isn't this a rather simplified notion? No, it's actually a very complex notion. And if you read my book, you'll see its complexities and why I've made this point. Nationalism is even not the same as patriotism. Patriotism is about loving your country, the way you love your mother. It doesn't matter whether she is or isn't in the eyes of the world the most beautiful woman on the planet. She's your mother and you love her. And you're not going to sit around judging her. That's patriotism. And many, many people love their country, even while they are aware of all the flaws and weaknesses and frustrations of their country. Nationalism is my country, right or wrong. My country always first. My country is better than any other country. That's very different. And I must say, we have to understand the difference for us to be able to be responsible citizens. There's a famous line by, I think it was Mark Twain, who said that patriotism is loving your country all the time, and nationalism is, true patriotism is loving your country all the time and loving your government when it is right, but criticizing it when it is wrong. So that's my understanding of patriotism, and so I will praise the government when they do the right thing, and I'll attack them when they do the wrong thing, which frankly makes my attacks all the more credible, because people know that I'm not one of those who just reflexively attacks the government whatever they do. And that's one of the reasons why I hope that my criticisms will be taken seriously, because I'm also not somebody who's unwilling to recognize progress, positive action, right decisions when they make them.
And which is why you're respected across political lines. But
I hope so.
But Dr. Tharoor, I must ask you, because you spoke about patriotism and civic nationalism being the better nationalism per se. But correct me if I'm wrong, but nationalism also had its origin in the universal cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Absolutely.
And to that end, how is that any lesser than the patriotism that one propagates today, or the civic nationalism that one propagates? Where do you think that nationalism, if at all, lost its
I've
way?
got a sentence in the book I'm rather proud of, so I'll share it with you that helps explain it. Both patriots and nationalists are willing to die for their country. Right. But whereas the patriot is willing to die for his country, the nationalist is willing to kill for his state. That is a big difference. That is a big difference. Patriotism doesn't seek to impose itself on somebody else. Patriotism, on the other hand, will defend his country. It's like, I don't want to force my mother to be your mother. But if you attack my mother, I will defend her. That's patriotism. Whereas a nationalist says, everything I have is the best in the world, I'm going to beat you up until you accept that you have to be like me. That's very different.
And why, according to you, is this very relevant for a high school student who's going to be watching this in school and who are watching this live?
Because I would say that there are such things as sort of good nationalism, which I believe is what our freedom movement was all about. It was about forging a single nationhood out of a collection of different parts of people of this country against a foreign oppressor who had come in cynically to loot and exploit us, and had taken one of the most prosperous societies in the world and driven it into the ground, into a poster child for third world poverty and disease and pestilence. So we had to fight against them. That was a legitimate anti-colonial nationalism. Once we had won our independence, once we had won the right for liberty, equality, and fraternity, we had to spend our time creating that. We had to ensure equality. We had to bring about fraternity. As Dr. Ambedkar wrote, a fraternity means brotherhood, or brotherhood and sisterhood, right? It's all about all of us caring for each other and seeing each other as our brothers and sisters. That kind of nationalism is very healthy. But he asked, are we really like that in our country? Or do we see hierarchies on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion? Are we going to say some people are more special citizens of India than others? He was against that, and the constitution he helped write was against that. He wants us to enshrine equality and fraternity. That is the work in progress that we need to enshrine.
It's often perceived that public servants eventually make the public their servants. And, yeah, and this is a perception that a lot of people have, and a lot of young people have, which is the reason why a lot of people choose not to go into politics.
Yeah.
You left what many would say would be the ultimate job of an international statesman with a with high pecuniary compensation, and joined a parliament which today has 46% of your colleagues have some case on them, 27 have rape cases on them, and there are 151 who have criminal cases on them. You left all of that to come to India. My question to you, to young people who are confused whether they should join politics and they should try to bring about change, or whether they should be outside of politics, and therefore, whether it be as business leaders, as authors, as lawyers, etc., they should bring about change from outside. What is your opinion and take to those young people?
It's a very, very difficult one to answer, and because ultimately you've got to find your own answer for yourself. Let me tell you a few things that may help you decide. I also grew up in a typical middle-class family where my parents had the attitude, you study hard and do well in your exams and make a career in life for yourself. It's the dumb clucks who can't pass the exams who are going to become politicians. So though I was reasonably popular and so on, and there was a prospect of sort of being elected to things, they didn't mind me contesting for elections within school, but they certainly were not interested in allowing me to get into politics. I did win an election in high school. I did win an election in college. I was president of the St. Stephen's College Students' Union, which was a non-political union. We had none of the ABVP and NSUI and SFI and all that. It was just students voting on students' issues. But if I had said I wanted to go out and contest in regular politics, they would have disapproved madly, because their argument was, your job is to study, that's why you're called a student. Now, many today would disagree. They would say that by the time you get to college, you're of an age where you ought to be concerned about society. And you're at an age when you have passionate feelings about what's different, what needs to be changed, then you should be able to be prepared to act on that through your political opportunities. There is no doubt that in a democracy, the best way to bring about change is politics. So if you do very well in your studies and choose a profession, that's fine. But you won't be the one making the decisions about where that profession can go in terms of opportunities, how much taxes you pay, what subjects you can study, how many people are in that field, how many colleges can be established in that. All of that's being decided by politicians. So if you feel, I've actually met young people, class 12 students, saying, sir, we are not interested in politics. To which my reply usually is, well, it's a pity, because politics is interested in you. All the options that will await you once you pass out of school, go into college, and then graduate from college and look for a job, all the possibilities are those that will be decided by politicians. So, fine, don't go into politics, but at least follow what's going on. Be informed enough to decide who you'd like to vote for, what kind of policies you'd like to vote for, because otherwise, you are abdicating control over your own future. Others, whom perhaps you may not consider worthy of you, will be the ones making decisions for you. That's why I finally went into politics. I never thought I could. I didn't come from a political family, and I didn't expect that I would get an opportunity, but when I was invited to contest, I leapt at it, even though I had left India to go to graduate school in the US at the age of 19, when the voting age was 21, so I had never even voted in an election. And I came back at 51, and they said, do you want to contest an election? And I foolishly said yes, because I didn't know what I was getting into. But it was an enormous challenge, and in many ways it taught me that democracy requires an enormous amount of effort, an enormous amount of hard work, and a lot of personal sacrifices which I've had to make over the years. So, is it easy? Is it fun? No. Can it be satisfying? Yes, but not always. You can when you have the satisfaction of doing things that really affect people's lives for the better, but very often you don't often have that. Can you make a difference in other ways? Yes, of course you can. If you're a very good doctor, if you're a very good lawyer, if you're a very good accountant, if you're a very good executive in a company that's making useful things for people, who knows? All of those ways you can help people, you can be good. No one is saying there's only one way forward. But if you are interested in public policy questions, then better to be a politician making those policies than being a bright, smart IAS officer just implementing policies that others have decided above you. That's ultimately the kind of choice I felt I could make or had to make. And to be very honest today, I've had moments when I have regretted, why the hell did I go into this profession? But there have been, for the most part, if I look back objectively at the overall 15 years I've spent in politics, in elected politics, I would say, I do believe that in small ways and in some big ways I've been able to make a difference, and that's what sustains me, making a difference.
That's the answer that got the round of applause, so it speaks for itself.
Thank you.
Bad governments are chosen by people who don't vote.
That's also very true.
And therefore, to be conscientious leaders of tomorrow is very important, and casting their vote at some point when universal adult franchise applies. But you did mention that politics is an instrument of change.
Yeah.
That in democracy, if you want to bring about change, then you should join politics. Politics also defines morality.
Yep.
And one of my favorite philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche, he speaks about morality in a way that many would question today. And he says that morality is something that is best left to the interpretation of the person in question. That who are we to define for somebody else what is moral and immoral? My question to you is this, that because you mentioned this, that when governments play God and when they decide what is moral and immoral, then how does civic society respond to that, given the fact that they are the subjects and the state is defining morality?
Very interesting point. In fact, Nietzsche was also talking about religion. He wasn't only talking about governments, because he said that basically moral codes are created by human beings to impose on other human beings. And at the same time, I think there are limitations to that argument, because my argument would be that personal morality is all very good. Maybe what is moral for him may not be what's moral for me, and what he considers immoral I may consider okay to do. But the acid test ought to be, does my right to do that hurt other people in the process? It seems there's an expression when you talk about freedom of speech, there's an expression that says that you have the perfect right to wave your fist about, but your right to wave your fist stops short of my nose. Right? You cannot wave your fist gladly because you have the freedom to do so. If in the process you're going to break my nose, then you hurt me and you have no right to do that. To my mind, that's a much more simple yardstick. Is, yes, you may choose to have your own interpretation of morality, as Rishabh's question and Nietzsche's argument seem to have, but you are not the one to decide that you can do something that hurts somebody else and no one should be taking action against you. Now, the government says that if you do hurt somebody else, the government will punish you. The police will arrest you. The judge will fine you or jail you. Right? So why does that happen in a government? Because the government wants to uphold certain standards of behavior in society. Religion may tell you, thou shalt not steal. Therefore, you should not steal. But remember, when you steal from him, he is hurting, right? He's losing something. And therefore, he has every right to be aggrieved and to go to the police and say, so-and-so stole something from me. And the police, therefore, can arrest the person, that so-and-so, and take him to court and say, this person stole from Rishabh. And not only will the court say, well, return it to Rishabh, but the court may say, go to jail to teach you not to steal from Rishabh. You see the point? Government is a way of ordering society. Now, civil society, Rishabh asks, what is their role? Civil society is not something that I believe one can give a complete carte blanche to, complete license to do what they collectively want. Because very often, civil society action can also mean the rule of the mob. So the police, let's say, for argument's sake, somebody commits a really unpleasant crime. The police arrest him and put him in jail. The mob surround the police station and say, you locked him up in a safe place, we want to beat him to death, give him to us. Is civil society right? Or is the policeman right in saying, no, we have a system in our country, we have laws, that person will sit in jail until he can be produced to a judge, the judge will decide whether he really did commit that crime, then he will be punished, and not by you, but by the state. You see what I'm saying? That's what government is versus what civil society can be. The collective wisdom of civil society may judge, for example, what is acceptable behavior and what's not. But that evolves in civil society. So, for example, matters of sexual behavior have changed a great deal. Not only in the West and in other countries where a lot of habits have evolved rather dramatically since the 1960s in terms of what is permissible and what is simply taken for granted even there. But it's also begun to evolve in India, not everywhere. So you have a curious coexistence of extremely modern attitudes to these things and some very traditional ones living side by side in our society. Now you can say, maybe in a particular Bollywood actor's family, it doesn't matter if somebody is going out and going to bed with various people. But maybe in your family it does matter. Are you going to say, well, if it's okay for that Bollywood actor, it's okay for me, even if my father and mother don't approve? These are very difficult questions, and you can't just dismiss them very lightly. Nor can you always say that what's right for society as a whole is not right for me. I will do what I want. Ask yourself again, who are you hurting in the process, and how much does that hurt? Harm them and harm everyone else. If you feel, yes, my father is hurt, but I'm not going to listen to that because he has no right to be hurt. It's my life after all, it's my body. Why should my father go around being hurt? That's a different argument. Maybe you can one day persuade him that you were right and he was wrong. But these are the kinds of calculations each of us has to make in our daily lives all the time.
Till we actually get Friedrich Nietzsche in artificial intelligence in some form, to be able to have this conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor, I think we'll put this conversation, this part of the conversation to rest. My second last question to you is this.
Well, I have some great news. They are 37 for 4, Australia. We've hit back. When we were all out for 150, I thought we were finished. But this is very good news. Stephen Smith, first ball to Bumrah for 0. Okay, let's go back to work. The most enthusiastic applause. I didn't say anything cleverer than that today.
All the cricketing aficionados. But in A Wonderland of Words, and that is a book that is available outside for all of you to get a copy of yours. It is a book that I'd recommend. But in A Wonderland of Words, and this is something that, because it's I.I.M.U.N's role model series, many people see you as a role model, I do. Thank for you. Sure. But Dr. Tharoor, in Leaders of Tomorrow, if there are 3 qualities that you would like young people to have, could you select 3 words from A Wonderland of Words that they should be having?
Well, it doesn't have to be from A Wonderland of Words. If you want to be a leader, first of all, a leader must care. The least appropriate word for a leader to have all the time is I, me, and myself. A leader must think about society as a whole, about larger numbers of people, whether it's their community, whether it's their city, their region, their country. A leader must be somebody who deserves to lead because they care. So empathy is a very important quality. Being aware of others, caring for them, and doing that. Secondly, a leader must know himself or herself very well. Know thyself is a very common expression. Why is that important? Because unless you understand who you are, what motivates you, what you're capable of, and what you're not capable of, he will not be a good leader. Knowing yourself is extremely important just to be a good human being, by the way. And I mean that for every one of you, whether you want to be a leader or not. Know yourself. Figure out as you're growing up in your school days what you're good at. It may not necessarily be, acing your exams or coming first in maths or winning the 100-meter dash or being the best actress in your class or whatever. It might be simply to be the person that people turn to when they're in pain or distress, because you will always offer them a consoling shoulder and a wise word. It may simply be the ability to make your friends laugh because you're damn good at telling a joke or pulling a prank or whatever. Whatever it is, everyone has a talent, everyone has a special quality. No one is perfect, not one person. No one succeeds all the time. We all have to take failure in stride and learn to live with it. But if you don't know who you are and what you're capable of, how can you inspire others? So be anchored, know yourself, be anchored in yourself, and at the same time, be the best version of you that you can be. Nobody else can be you. So, if you know this is something I know I can do and I just didn't try hard enough, try harder next time. But if you say this is something I just can't do, God hasn't built me to do this, I'm not able to run as fast as the 10 next kids in the class, I'm not even going to try to enter the athletics meet next week, next year, whatever. There's no shame in that, but you've come to understand your capability and define it. So the second quality that I would really want is to know yourself. But the third quality, and this may surprise you, it ties into the first one of empathy, is a certain amount of modesty and humility, what you might call self-abnegation. Self-abnegation is about saying, in fact, there's a great Chinese poem which is not in the book, but I'll tell you about it. It's literally about 3,000 years old. It was about kings, but you can also apply it to leaders. The poem said that the worst kind of leader is the worst kind of king, the poem said, is the one who is feared and hated. Obviously, right? But yeah, some of the toughest kings in those days were feared and hated. So the next worst, he says, are the ones who are just loved. Everyone loves them, but they don't actually accomplish anything. Then the next are the ones who do a great deal and go around taking credit for it. But the best king of all is the one who, when he has actually achieved something for his people, the people say, we did it ourselves. Can you imagine 3,000 years ago somebody could think like that? That's actually the truth. The best kind of leadership. Many of you have known teachers who've been so good that they've taught you, they've opened up your minds, they've ignited a little spark in your head, you've gone and written that exam and aced it, you won the prize or the medal, whatever, and the teacher just comes and congratulates you and says, I'm so proud of you. In your heart, you know that that teacher deserves as much credit as you do. All you've done is learned what she has taught you. But she knew how to teach you and what to teach you. But that is her leadership, that she's created your success story, given you that belief in yourself, and she stepped back. That's called self-abnegation. And that's a very important quality in leaders.
And it can be substantiated with a certain amount of self-deprecating humor as well, which is something that you use, Cyrus Brocha does, and so does Veer Das. And I try to mimic. But
yeah, I mean, I think, the ability to laugh at yourself is so important, and to take people along with a light line, sure, absolutely.
Right. Now there is, before I let you go, Dr. Tharoor, there is an audience which is Gen Alpha and Gen Z. It would only be fair. We understand that you understand everything about English. So that
the Gen Alpha words keep evolving, and you keep coming up with words that I've never heard before, so don't even expect me to go there.
No, there are some that are very easy, and the others you can just pass. At the end of which we'll give you a hamper, which is smaller than the hampers that are given on television, but it's a hamper nonetheless.
As long as it doesn't hamper me and my getting on my flight tomorrow. Okay, go ahead.
The first word is goat, which is a very easy one. Goat.
As in G-O-A-T-S or G-H-O-S-T? You've got a slightly blocked nose.
G-O-A-T.
Goat, greatest of all time.
Correct.
Yeah. Actually, that isn't your generation. That goes back at least one generation before you.
It's
I
Gen Z.
started hearing it already in the 90s. Yeah.
When I say sus, S-U-S,
Suspect? Suspicion? Yeah, I suss something like, I think, I suss that you've got a cold, Rishabh.
more than a cold, it's actually a bad throat.
Poor chap.
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a lozenge when we're done.
When I say the word Riz,
Riz. This guy's got Riz, hasn't he? Yeah, it's charisma. It's a short form. But honestly, I don't think charisma needs contracting. It's an easy enough word. But anyway, Riz is charisma. Yeah.
when I say Delulu,
What did you just say?
there's a word called Delulu.
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 I don't know, delusional? Yeah? Really? He's delusional, so he's Delulu. Okay, fair enough.
And when I use the word slaps, which is very different from the English dictionary slaps, what comes to mind?
S-N-A or S-L-A?
S-L-A-P-S.
Slaps.
Slaps.
Ah, slaps. So it's not supposed to be hitting
it's not.
somebody. So it's not a slap-up meal. That's also a very old-fashioned thing. A slap-up meal is a very big meal, by the way, in 1950s English. Not slaps. I think this one I may have to give up, but I'll hazard a guess just for the hell of it. Something that's so good you want to slap your thigh, no? Yeah?
Almost that, yeah.
Great, slap.
yeah.
Is that what it is? Great.
It is something that's amazing or very exciting. So
Okay, that's
you
probably where it came from. Wow.
We've got 5 on 5 on Generation Alpha slangs. So that's excellent. But Dr. Tharoor, there's a small part which is this or that also we play at the very end. And let me ask you, books or binge watching?
Books or what watching?
Books or binge watching?
No, books, obviously.
Books. Test cricket or T20s?
Test cricket.
Australia or India, who's winning the Border Gavaskar Trophy?
Too close to call, but we'll all vote for India.
School days or college?
College, in my case. I'll go into a long explanation some other time, but yeah, college really shaped me, made who I was.
X or Instagram?
That's a tough one to answer because, to be honest, I'm only on X. I have an account on Instagram, but my staff operate it. So, honest answer would be X, but I have to say I'm getting very disillusioned with X.
Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the author or the politician?
Both, but mainly the former. And I've explained why when people have asked me this. I mean, politicians are looking for power, office, position. I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP. But I hope never to be a former author.
How lovely. You've got generations who are reading your books, so I do not think that will ever come to be. But Delhi or Thiruvananthapuram?
Thiruvananthapuram. To begin with, Thiruvananthapuram's AQI is 66 and Delhi's a couple of days ago was 1,000, 1,100. Unbreathable, unlivable air. It's terrible between November and February.
You could even say Mumbai.
Yeah, Mumbai is acceptable too. I grew up here from class 3 to class 8. Lovely city.
India or Bharat?
Look, they're both the same thing in my view. I feel very strongly you have to say both because they're both the same thing. In fact, the constitution says India, that is Bharat. There you are.
And the last one determines whether you win the hamper or not. The best platform to empower young people, I.I.M.U.N. or India's international movement to United Nations.
I.I.M.U.N is actually an organization I've seen from its inception. I think Rishabh called me for one of his very first events when he was still a student and the movement was a kind of model UN on a slightly biggish scale. And from then, I've seen it evolve and grow into this first national and now international network of students. I think it's a terrific group. It gives you an amazing platform. It's created leaders. I've met some bright young people. There's one waiting in the wings there who helps run the organization, who started off like you, sitting in an audience. I think what's exciting about I.I.M.U.N is precisely that as young people, you're empowered, you do things, but you do it within a structure, within a network that has now been established, but which you will help grow and be part of. So congratulations to I.I.M.U.N and keep growing.
And thank you for supporting the organization from its very inception. We started in 11 and you joined in 14. And since then, you've been the chairperson, a little later, chairperson of the advisory board. You've always said yes. You've always had a smile. You are a living exemplar of the word role model. And on a slightly jovial note, people say that there is nothing left in the right and there is nothing right in the left. In a day and age where this statement holds truer than ever before, I'm very glad and happy that we have a center that is called Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you so much.
If I may trouble you after a 10-minute break, if it's possible for you, because I know your schedule, but if it is possible, the boys and girls would get their books, had this request that they could get the copies signed. So
I can sign a certain number of copies, but literally if everyone here gets a book, it'll be impossible to have enough time to sign.
So we just do a few copies. The first ones to get a book can come and get this sequence.
Okay, fine.
Fantastic.
Should we stay here for that?
No.
We'll
We
have
just
a
take 10
table?
minutes and then after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, one last time, Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you.